everybody. Football season is over for us as fans, but for players, the offseason continues pushing the physical, mental, and emotional edges of the game. Clint Gresham spent 6 seasons as a long snapper with the Seahawks, including 2 appearances at the Super Bowl. He described his release by the team in 2016 as the worst breakup ever. In a new book, he details his struggles with anxiety, depression, and even suicidal thoughts, and how he eventually found a way out of that darkness. Please welcome today Clint Gresham. Hi. It's so good to meet you. How you doing?
So nice to meet you.
Thank you. Have a seat. Your hands are nice and cool, too.
Oh,
that
yeah.
feels good. So, before we talk about what's in the book, what made you want to write the book?
I needed a job. No, writing has always been therapy for me in a lot of ways, and just kind of helped me get a lot of the stuff out of my heart and into something else. And I think more than anything, writing the book kind of helped me grieve the death of my identity as a football player, and kind of process all of that stuff, and because it's inevitable that we're going to put our identity in what we do, and I think it's even more so with athletics. And so to have that season of about a year of just being able to kind of go to those spots was really, really healthy for me.
I hear that transition is tough for everybody, no matter how long their career lasts, and inevitably in football it's not going to last as long as a normal career. You're going to exit sometime in your 20s, 30s, if you're Tom Brady, maybe later, but not for very many people. You described that day of being released, and by the way, you were great, and you helped us so much. So
thank you, thank you.
There you go. But the day you were released, you said, was like the worst breakup ever. So I mean, heartbreak and just, as you mentioned, a loss of identity. Can you describe what you went through and where it took you?
Yeah, you know, you buy into the family thing, and football becomes a father in a lot of ways, and especially for so many guys that don't come from a home that had a strong father. Football becomes a father because it gives you identity and it gives you love, but it makes you perform for it. So it's twisted. And so you get into this culture of, hey, we love you, you're here and you're awesome. Until you're not. And then we don't want you in the family anymore. And now all of a sudden it isn't so much so that, oh, I lost my job. It's dad doesn't want me. And when you have a kid who has had that experience already in his life and it triggers all of that stuff, like, it's no wonder the guys have such a hard time when they're done. And I was aware of that stuff. I knew all of that stuff, and I have a great relationship with my parents. And even for me, it was stirring all that stuff up in me because I'd been a football player for 20 years.
Right. Man, that's a pretty profound insight. You opened up in this book in a way that, first of all, thank you for that, because a lot of times people don't want to do that, even if they're not in the public eye, and maybe especially not if, you know, they've had a macho man sports background, right? And then you say, hey, something broke, you know, something broke in me, and you decided to share it. Was that part hard? I mean, writing is one thing, then sharing it publicly is another thing.
It was really hard, and the book is some of the most raw and kind of intimate stories of my life, and it very much felt like almost this vulnerability hangover. It's like where people are reading about some really intense things that happened in my life. But what's so amazing about transparency and vulnerability and authenticity is that if we are willing to be courageous enough to show people our scars, it's all of a sudden, it's like people be like, hey, me too. Like, I went through that also. Thank God I'm not the only one. And it creates this sense of connection and community, which are the things that we need to be able to work through those heartaches in our life.
It's so true, because we feel the stigma of experiencing those things. We feel some shame. And that doesn't go away unless you are able to share it. You also write very openly about the role that faith played in recovering from these things. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that all of us, people only change in the presence of unconditional love. And I've found that in my relationship with Jesus. And as I've processed that, and it doesn't mean that I have arrived, I have not arrived at all. And this is such an aspirational type of thing, and it really just has set me on a course of, I know what I'm pursuing, and I know who I am, and when I know who I am, that makes it so that when things come against me in my life, I'm grounded. instead of trying to build my life upon something that can be taken away.
That whole idea of mixing up what you do with who you are, and that you can't control what happens with your job, but you're in control of who you are. You wrote a blog post, if I understand this correctly, about suicidal thoughts and suicide prior to the tragedy that hit the WSU family.
Yeah.
What can you share with us about that?
I think that there are more people who are struggling with that than we even realize. And I was so heartbroken to hear about Tyler and what WSU went through, and it just grieves me because I know what that was like, and had, you know, things maybe, I can't say that maybe that wouldn't have happened to me at times. I mean, I certainly found myself in those dark spots. And so we need to talk about it, and we need to bring it out, because once you bring things out into the open and share the truth of what we're going through and be authentic, then it takes away its power.
I'm wondering, since it gets harder, I think women have an easier time sharing than men in general. I mean, that's an overgeneralization, but, you know, and then you talk about sports and being tough and who you tell. Is there a role now for men to talk to one another about how this needs to change in terms of how manhood is perceived, what is appropriate to share, what a friendship includes?
I think that, especially just in the sports world, and especially as men, like, we want to be perceived as competent. Like, I want somebody to have faith in me that I can go out and do my job. It's like, you know, I did an evaluation when I was at the NFL scouting combine, and it said, "Have you ever had mental health issues?" I'm like, "Nope." I don't want you to think that about me, because I want you to have confidence in me. So we learn to put these masks on because we want people to have confidence in us, but we do need to have those few people that we can be real with. And if we don't have that, then we're going to find ourselves really isolated really, really fast. And then the isolation stuff creates addiction stuff, which all ends up leading into this crazy cycle that we can find ourselves in. And so having community where people really see the rawness of who I am and that I'm not perfect, it just solves so many issues in our life.
What helped, what do you think really turned the corner for you?
Honestly, it was probably getting released. It was really, really painful because it made me confront a lot of that stuff, but it also sent me on a journey of going into those spaces. And once I had the emotional bandwidth to go there, things happened a lot quicker. And, you know, I would go into work, and I was so thankful for my time with the Seahawks, and I learned so much about myself and pursuing goals, but I felt alone, and I felt isolated, and I felt like I can't tell anybody about this stuff. And what I've realized is that there was probably a whole lot of other guys who felt like that too.
For sure. But there's hope, and it starts with kind of talking to one another, and you've opened the door for that with the book, and I really appreciate it. I understand there's a little baby announcement that needs to be made.
I'm having a baby. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to be perfectly straight with you, I think she's having the baby. But
Yes.
as I recall, that's a somewhat singular experience to the wife, but then the baby belongs to both of you.
We're so excited. It was a total surprise. So my sweet wife's at home throwing up right now.
That's, bless her heart, I know exactly how she
pray
feels.
For us. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so
really
much. It was so good to be with
Wish
you.
you every good thing going forward.
Thank you.
Clint is going to be a special guest at the Higher Ground Men's Conference with keynote speaker Brock Heward on February 10th at Westminster Chapel in Bellevue. We'll post details for you on New Day's website. When we come back, movie critic Laramie Legal shares his favorite Olympics-themed films after a break.
Yeah.